of a short course here tonight. We needed to switch computers. But I'm going to be speaking tonight about the First Coast Chimes. It's part of Florida's golf over the last 130 years. And as you will see, I've got about 90 slides, so I'm going to go pretty quick. But I graduated from college with a degree in journalism before I went into the golf business, what I call my second career in golf, because I had an earlier career in golf. My dad was a golf professional. He started as a caddy in 1907, and he was a golf professional for 35 years in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was just 6 years old, but my mom kept golf alive for my brother and my sister and I ended up getting back into the business when I was 28 years old. Golf in Florida was first played by this gentleman, John Hamilton Gillespie. Gillespie was born in Edinburgh, Scotland. His father and he eventually became a member at the Royal and Ancient Golf Club in St. Andrews. And when he was 21 years old, his father sent him to Sarasota, Florida, or I should say what would become Sarasota, Florida. The company he was working for in Edinburgh bought 50,000 acres of land in what we now know today as Sarasota, and he sent his son over to try to save the property and create something out of it. He arrived with his golf clubs in tow, and he decided that he had to build a golf course. So near what is Main Street today in Sarasota, he had people clear a long strip of land through the jungle, and he would play down one way and back the other. And that was his 2-hole golf course. And eventually, after the turn of the century, he built an 18-hole golf course. And he actually died on that golf course in 1923 with old age, so I'm sure he was happy to leave in a good spot. Many of you are probably familiar with these two names, but Florida and Florida tourism and Florida's development can thank these two gentlemen, Henry Plant and Henry Flagler, two major railroad tycoons. Henry Plant was a leading railroad owner after the Civil War, and he had most of the major railroads in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and he decided his railroad ended in Waycross, and he decided to bring it down to Jacksonville. And from Jacksonville, he took the western side of the St. Johns River and went down to Orlando and then over to Tampa and all the way down to the Naples area. And he had a steamship line that also took people down to hotels that he built and eventually owned in Havana, Cuba as well. Henry Flagler, most of us are familiar with Flagler. I don't know how many of you know that Flagler was a partner with John D. Rockefeller in Standard Oil Company. And the reason he came to Jacksonville was kind of looking for a place to retire and to have a home, and he ended up down in St. Augustine. And he built his first hotel in St. Augustine that we're all familiar with. Today's Flagler College. If you haven't visited, they give tours. It's a wonderful tour to go through it. It's partially used as a dormitory. It's part of the campus, and you can see the grandeur of the hotel. He built this hotel in 1888, and he added the Alcazar across the street in 1890. The first St. Augustine golf course consisted of 3 holes, and they called it Fort Greene. And Fort Greene, you played the 3 holes 3 times around to make a 9-hole round of golf. And that was in 1895 when it first opened. In 1897, he hired this gentleman, Alexander H. Findley. Finley was another Scot. And Finley came over to the United States in 1886 for the first time because he had read about the Wild West, and he had a friend who had a ranch in Nebraska. And he went out there, and there's a story that he played golf in some of the open fields in Nebraska, and the Indians came to watch these crazy white men playing this great game over the hills in western Nebraska. But Finley designed over 100 golf courses in the United States, but they were very basic, rudimentary golf courses. And then those included the golf courses that he built for Flagler. Now Flagler wanted to build hotels, and then he brought in golf, and it was the responsibility of Finley to use golf and golf tournaments to give publicity up to New York City, up to Boston, up to the Philadelphia area in the newspapers to attract people to come down and vacation at the Flagler golf courses. This, if you see the fold in the middle, was from a 1901 promotional pamphlet for the First Coast Railroad. And I've since learned, and you'll see in this presentation, that the golf courses all weren't laid out in an interesting rectangle. They had more motion than space, but in order to fit it into a brochure, they made it look like they all were laid out in a similar direction. But you can see the links of St. Augustine, Ormond Beach, down to Palm Beach, down to Miami, and similarly, he had a steamship line that would take passengers from Miami over to the Bahamas. So this is the brochure layout, and you can see that they named all of the holes, various lengths, not too long, but they totaled about 2,546 yards when that was first built in 1898. Now, how many of you are familiar with this view? Almost all of us, if not all of us. How many of you are familiar with this view? This was the 9-hole golf course from a postcard in 1903. So the golf course, the original course, was 3 holes around the fort. But the popularity of golf was growing, and the San Marco Hotel, which was the first great hotel in St. Augustine, burned down in 1897. And that opened up the land to the west of the original 3-hole golf course. And if you wonder where that golf course was, it's the current 2-3-story parking garage in the Francis Field. Now here's the true layout of the golf course in 1898. And you can see the little note there, it says City Gates. The hotel was on those grounds. They even called it the San Marco grounds. And it was a 9-hole course. And it wasn't unusual for early golf courses in order to get them long enough that they sometimes had holes that crossed each other. And you had to be careful when you played. And even some of the golf courses in Scotland still have some of those holes that cross. So this was from a magazine I found in 1899. I just had to throw this in. These are the city gates that I showed you on the map. And they're there, still there today, and they're at the north end of St. George Street. So the golf course was just outside the gates at St. George Street. And the gentleman, not driving on the right, but the gentleman sitting to our right, is William Sherman Jennings. He was Florida's governor in 1901, and he actually retired to and passed away in St. Augustine, and he's buried here in Jacksonville. But I just threw that in because I like the picture. And it did tie into the gates. So one of the first great matches in the world, and when I say in the world, there were great matches In 1860, the British Open was created in Scotland at Prestwick Golf Club. And the great golfers of Scotland and England would play over the Prestwick Golf Course. And golf came to the United States in 1888, and a lot of Scots came over to find work as golf professionals in the United States. But they were frowned upon by the Scottish professionals who stayed back because they said the best stayed in Scotland, and they would play in what we call often the British Open, known as the Open Championship. Well, in 1990, February 17th, 1990, Spalding hired and signed a contract with Harry Vardon. And Harry Vardon became the first ever sports athlete to sign an endorsement contract. So we can blame Harry in a way, we can also thank him. But Harry was the reigning 1899 Open champion. Willie Smith, who grew up and had brothers in business, was from Carnoustie, Scotland. He was the reigning U.S. Open champion. So Spalding brought Harry Vardon over to promote the new Vardon golf ball, the Vardon Flyer, and he did a tour in the United States. He played almost 80 matches in the United States. Wow. It was over an 8-month period, and he went home to defend his title in the middle of summer, and then came back and won the U.S. Open in September in Chicago. But these two were pitted together at St. Augustine, the first ever time the great champion of the United States met the great champion of Scotland. I was lucky enough to find this photograph on the left, and this is from the Spalding Golf Guide, and that is Harry Vardon playing from under a tree, hitting a ball out left-handed to get the ball back in the fairway on the first hole of their great match. So I was, as a one-time photographer, I was so excited to see that there was actually a photographer there to capture this. If you look at the article over on the side, this is from the St. Augustine newspaper that day. This is an update of the morning match. They played 18 holes in the morning and 18 holes in the afternoon. But the newspaper covered the morning match because they had to print the newspaper. They didn't have time to print the whole story. You can see Vardon played very well, shot a 71, and even parred the first hole, even though he hit a spectator, and his ball bounced off the fairway and under that tree before he was able to hit it out. Some interesting story. Here's a look at St. Augustine Golf in 1917. This is from the American Annual Golf Guide. The top course was a course that was opened in 1908 in St. Augustine. The one right below it, 1895, is the original 9-hole course in St. Augustine around the fort. And if you notice, it says clay with oiled greens. The greens were not grass greens back in those days. And I was able to find this 1920 aerial photograph of the fort, and I put those numbers in to kind of show you back between the numbers 9 and 5 was the clubhouse. When you came out to the first tee, you played down to number 1, which is the first green, second green, third green, fourth green, back and forth. And again, the city gates, and to the west was the site of the original San Marco Hotel. The third course was built in 1917, designed by Donald Ross, and it was a wonderful golf course. Some of you, if you're golfers, may have played it down in St. Augustine. It closed in 2003, sadly. It's been turned into a housing development, which happens to a lot of golf courses. The third golf course, I found this photograph very interesting. It's from Golf Illustrated magazine, and 1931, January 1931. It was unusual for golf courses back in that era to have practice facilities, or what a lot of people call a driving range. But if you look, it looks like there's two people there getting lessons. Looks like a golf professional leaning down on his knees, kind of saying, I know you can do this. And then another pair in the background. I tried to find more information on this golf course and I've been able to do it. But the 1917 course played host to the 1947 Florida East Coast Championship. This was before the LPGA was formed. But there was a great ladies tournament, and you see Babe Sahara's there on the right, and I don't know how many of you know who Peggy Kirk Bell was, but she was a great player, and she and her husband owned Pine Needles Golf Resort in Pinehurst, and she was a great proponent of women's golf and teaching women with golf clinics, and they had week-long clinics in Pinehurst. I'm going to try to do just a quick run through for you, but this was the links of Ormond Beach on the Flagler line. This was the first tee, and early designs, the tees weren't grass, the greens weren't grass, they were sand, and the tees were just a square box, almost like a sandbox that I grew up in as a kid playing in it. But that's how it was. But you see the ladies in the background with the bicycles. Then the next course, you'd get back on the train if you wanted to do a tour of Flagler's golf courses. You'd get down to Palm Beach. Today it's known as the Breakers Hotel. That golf course, the site still exists. The course has been updated, but it's the oldest existing golf course in the state of Florida today. This was the first tee on tournament day. I'm going to give you a little enlargement. If you notice that trough on the right side of the tee, anybody know what that is? If it wasn't tournament day, most likely that young man would not be sitting at a table checking people in. It would have been more a first come, first served basis. When you got to the tee, somebody in your foursome would have put a ball in that trough and it would roll down, and there might be 1, 2, 5, 10 balls in that trough, and that's how you knew when it was your turn to take the first tee. This was the first green. Wasn't very large, was it?
Wow.
But they did have pin flags.
Did they call them greens then? Did they call them?
Yeah, they still were greens because Scotland, where the game started,
Oh, okay.
they were greens.
Yes.
But they had to use sand in the earliest days in the United States. This was Palm Beach Country Club, which was originally owned by the Breakers Hotel. And this lady is Bessie Fenn. Her father was hired to be the golf professional at the golf course back in the late 1890s. When it opened, he passed away in the mid-1920s, and they decided to hire her. She was a great amateur player, and I'll tell you just one quick story. At the club, the Duke of Windsor came to play. He was a guest at the Breakers Hotel. And he came in the golf shop, went out, teed off, and Bessie was a no-nonsense lady. And he didn't pay his greens fee. And there's a story of Bessie running down the first fairway, yelling, "Dookie, Dookie, you didn't pay your greens fee." This was the last hotel in Florida on Flagler's line. It was called the Royal Palm. And again, that's the first tee, it was a lady teeing off. But I was fascinated and wanted to share this picture with you. This is the putting clock. And I didn't know much about it, I was able to find a 1921 magazine just yesterday. And the theory of the putting clock, if you look around the clock, there are markers where normally every 5 minutes would be marked off. And they put a hole somewhere in the center of the green, but not in the dead center of the green, off center. So as you went around the clock, you would putt to the hole that was toward the center of the green, and then you'd hole out, you'd come back to the next point and go and putt again. But by being off center, you didn't putt to a repetitive distance, you putted to varying distance as you went around the putting clock. And I don't know if you see that little boy, he's pulling a drag mat, which was smoothing out footprints on the sand green. So that's Flagler in the early days. Let's talk a little bit about Jacksonville. Florida, largest city in 1900 was Jacksonville, Florida, with a population of over 28,000 people. What's the largest city by population in Florida today? Jacksonville. A lot of people think Miami or Tampa or Orlando. Jacksonville is still the largest city by population in the state. There was a great fire in 1901, and it left over 8,000 people homeless, and it had $15 million in losses, which was a lot of money back then. But if you think back to that article I had up there on the Vardon and Smith match down in St. Augustine, it mentioned that Florida Country Club members were there to watch the match. The first golf course in Jacksonville was Florida Country Club, and I was lucky enough to find this postcard on eBay. Everybody finds everything on eBay, right? With the tennis courts and the St. John's River. This was on the west bank of the St. John's River. And the clubhouse was designed by a gentleman by the name of Henry Bacon. Anybody recognize that name? As I mentioned, many of the members went to that famous match. It was a 9-hole course and then opened around 1910 as an 18-hole course. It was in Ortega on the St. John's River. It was about 5,800 yards. In 1917, those were the guest fees. See Henry Bacon up there? He designed the Lincoln Memorial. He built the clubhouse and designed a home for his mother in Ortega, where she retired to. Unfortunately, both the clubhouse and his mother's home no longer exist. So let's come a little closer. Atlantic Beach, the Continental Hotel. Henry Flagler bought the hotel, participated in the building of it, and then, I should say, he bought the railroad that came out to Jack's Beach in Atlantic Beach. And all his other hotels were winter hotels. At times, they didn't even open until January. And they had a spring season of January till about the end of April. And then they'd close down for 8 months out of the year. This hotel was a summer hotel. And it was built to attract people from the Atlanta and other points in the south to come to the beach for the cooling breezes and the atmosphere. It had as I understand, it had an original golf course that may have been 9 holes, but they hired A.W. Tillinghast, a very famous golf course designer in the 1920s and the 1930s. And he designed an 18-hole golf course, but what you see here is what they called a lily putt golf course, which was a par 3 or even somewhat shorter style golf course, and it was built right in front of the hotel. And the far far side of the hotel would be the beach. And they had a beautiful long pier there. But the Lilliput golf courses, this was an ad by Tillinghast out of a famous golf magazine in 1915. And he would design golf courses anywhere from putting greens to par 3 golf courses in miniature. And that's what the Lilliput golf course was. And it became the forerunner to mini golf. Again, I was lucky enough to find out that there was a par 3 golf course. This is a postcard from 1932 in Jacksonville. It was near downtown at what was called the Waterworks Park, and the radio station back then, WJAX. Today it's known as the Ape. They changed the call letters. But again, down in St. Augustine, this is the Bayfront Mini Golf, and this is the oldest existing mini golf course in the state of Florida. It was built in 1949, and it's owned by Ripley's, believe it or not. Are you ready? I have Mrs. Boykin here in the front row. I want to introduce you to her. Her father and mother were the people who named Ponte Vedra Beach. Can I share your age?
I guess it doesn't matter.
She's 92 years old.
I will be Saturday.
Saturday. And she was the first person born in Ponte Vedra Beach.
Oh, are you?
So we have an honored guest this evening.
Are you doing autographs after this?
Yes, and OLD.
So the original Jacksonville Beach golf links was built for the employees of the National Lead Company. And then a new 19 holes was designed in 1927 by W.D. Clark of Chicago. And I got a lot of this information because of this beautiful lady and the book she wrote about her years growing up in Ponte Vedra Beach. The new golf course opened in 1928 in the renamed community of Ponte Vedra Beach. Excuse me. And the National Lead Company, I don't know if you all realize this or not, but they own 17 miles of oceanfront. Basically, from Jack's Beach, almost all the way down to St. Augustine. And they mined the dunes.
Oh.
And if you're a golfer, and if you've ever played with a titanium driver, some of the minerals that came out of the sand dunes was titanium.
That's why they bought the property.
What's that?
That's why National Lead bought the property. They were taking titanium and rutile out of the sand, because that's an ingredient in paint.
So, National Lead, oh, I spelled it wrong. Oh, no, it's no. No, it's okay. They transferred her father from New York City.
From St. Louis.
He was in St. Louis at the time. Colonel Joseph C. Stalin. He was a World War I flying hero. He had, you afterwards asked her about all the medals that he was awarded by France and England. And he and his wife came up with the idea of Ponte Vedra Beach because they saw a map of Spain, and there was a similar city on a coast in Spain, and their daughter, present tonight, was the firstborn. The picture is of her older brother, who I guess was born in St. Louis before they came down.
Yes.
And the professional Michael K. Ryder. Now Ryder was born in Scotland, and he was a professional, private professional to Daniel Guggenheim, and you probably recognize the name Guggenheim. the Family Foundation, the Guggenheim Museum, and many other great things that they've done. And for 2 years, he built golf courses around Florida, and then when he built this one for W.D. Clark, he chose to stay at the Jacksonville Beach Golf Links. The course, new golf course, only 3 years, but it only lasted 3 years. The reason for that was they hired Herb Strong to build the ocean course. And the course opened in 1932. Strong was a founding member of the PGA of America back in 1916. And if you're a golfer at all, you might recognize some of his other designs. The Engineers Club in Long Island, Saucon Valley, Canterbury in the Cleveland, Ohio suburbs, and Inwood Country Club on Long Island, which is where Bobby Jones won his first U.S. Amateur. And this is what the golf course looked like in the early days. Now you see what it looks like. Now maybe this makes a little more sense. In the 1930s, it was named one of America's 4 toughest golf courses, along with Pebble Beach, Pine Valley, Oakmont, and the Ocean Course. It was so tough, and with Strong's ties to the PGA of America, he was able to get the Ryder Cup brought to Ponte Vedra Beach in 1939. Who's heard of the Ryder Cup in Ponte Vedra Beach in 1939? But guess what? Even though it made the cover of PGA magazine in September 1939, it was never played. The reason, World War II broke out in the European theater, and the British canceled just 3 weeks before they were about to get on the ship to come to Ponte Vedra Beach. But that's again, I found that cover on eBay, and I was so excited to get it because it's such a great local tie. So it was one of the toughest golf courses. The Ponte Vedra Club was built and intended to be a resort. You know, I want to come back, I'm looking at Patty here. Her father was the leading driving force at bringing A1A down from, I guess, North Carolina.
He was supposed to go from Callahan, Maine to San Diego to Cuba.
Right. And he brought it in, working with the U.S. government and with the various states, and brought A1A, and that's why the original A1A went right past the Inn and Club, down to St. Augustine, and all the way down to Key West. But her father received many awards for being the person who was the driving force behind getting the project together, getting the governments together, getting the municipalities together, so they could create this force that could make Florida a great destination. But in 1947, the golf course was so hard, they hired the famous Robert Trent Jones Sr. with the goal to make it more resort friendly. And then additional construction, if you play golf, the new west 9 holes was designed by Jones in 1961. The famous Joe Lee golf course architect added the second 9, putting the 2 9s together, and created the lagoon course. And then our own local Bobby Weed did a remodel of the Ocean Club and then a restoration in 2020. Bobby Weed worked for Pete Dye. Bobby Weed worked for Pete Dye on his construction crew. He was asked to stay as the golf course superintendent at TPC Sawgrass when it opened in 1980. And then Bobby went on to a very illustrious golf designing. Jacksonville Beach Golf Club, today the municipal golf course here in Jacks Beach, was designed by Sam Snead. It was opened as a 9-hole golf course in 1959, and then the second 9 was planned, but they opened the first night early, and they thought it might be a possible resort. But Bob Walker came back and redesigned the course in 1987, and then just 5 years ago, Harrison Menchie redesigned the course again, and it's been a wonderful hit, and it's one of the best values in golf you can find anywhere. So Jacksonville was not without early discrimination. Religion-based, it was very difficult for Jewish people to join a club. They were blackballed in most cases at the private clubs. And on a racial basis, the Jim Crow era, blacks at first were not allowed to play any golf course. And then they were allowed to play point blank. The first municipal golf course, I'm sorry? Yeah. Yeah, I'll get to it too, I think. So,
Where the black could play.
so, a gentleman by the name of Abraham Lincoln Lewis, who was born 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, lived in Jacksonville and created a very prominent insurance company that sold insurance, life insurance, to African Americans. He opened a golf course in 1926 on the northwest side of town, and it was the city's only African American country club. When he died in 1947, the club closed with his death, but later that year, his son reopened the golf course, and he reopened it and wanted it to be open to everybody. So the club prospered into the 1970s until, with the end of discrimination, most of the private clubs and public golf courses were allowing blacks and people of Jewish faith to join. I read, one of the articles I read said that the color green was very popular at the private clubs, so that they started to accept the Jewish people, because they have the green money. Beauclair, my wife is from Montreal, she told me up there would be pronounced Beauclair, but Beauclair down here, I guess, was designed by Robert Trent Jones Sr., the same person who updated the Inn and Club. It was a 9-hole course, primarily Jewish. It was just south of San Jose Country Club. And again, it opened, when the membership rolls opened at the private clubs, a lot of the members sought a broader experience. And that's now where the Jewish Center is, in a housing development known as Beauclair. So, how many people have heard of Brentwood 4? A couple of hands. These 4 gentlemen, Frank Hampton, Edward Norman, D.O.E. Brown, and Charles Brown, Brentwood was the name I was trying to remember. There were only 2 courses in Jacksonville in the 1950s, and the blacks were allowed to play Brentwood on Mondays and Hyde Park on Fridays. And on a Monday, they were playing a national qualifying tournament for a national black tournament. It rained out. They came back the next morning to finish their round in the qualifying, and they weren't allowed to play. So they went over to Hyde Park and they wouldn't allow them to play. So they filed suit in a local court for access to the golf course. They lost in the local court. They lost in the regional court. They lost in the district court. And 5 years later, it was elevated to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court decided that municipalities could not block minorities from playing at any time. And that opened up not only the golf courses, but it opened up parks, baseball fields, swimming pools, and it was truly one of the great landmark decisions of the Supreme Court in the Equal Rights era. want to highlight real quick, the Jacksonville Area Golf Association came together in 1954, and you see the list of clubs there that were basically the only existing clubs at the time. And the idea was, there was no city champion, because each club had their own champions, but you could play some courses, you couldn't play others, or you didn't want to play other courses. Excuse me. So they formed this organization, and today there are 53 member clubs in the Jacksonville Area Golf Association, stretches from Amelia Island all the way down to Palatka. So when you think of professional golf, I'm wondering if you think about this. Excuse me. The LPGA. It first came to Jacksonville in 1951, and then it became the Jacksonville Open in 1952, and you see some of the great winners there. There's Smiling Babe Harris, who won at Economy Journeyman Club. And Louise Suggs, Patty Berg, Jackie Pung, and Nikki Wright won 3 times here in Jacksonville. Now, this is what most people think of as early golf in Jacksonville from a professional standpoint. And that's the Jacksonville Open, which was played beginning in 1945 and into 1976. Here's a list of tournaments and the champions, and you can see all the different golf courses that were played by the Jacksonville Open. It's important to point out from 1954 to 1964, there was no tournament played, and then it returned to Jacksonville. Brentwood Country Club, which was Jacksonville's first municipal golf course in 1922, hosted the first 2 Jacksonville Opens, and Sam Snead won both of those. The following years, they moved over to the other municipal golf course, Hyde Park. By the way, both golf courses are Donald Ross designed golf courses, so they were very well designed, and the tour players liked them. Hyde Park opened in 1925, and I'm showing you this hole because of this man. Ben Hogan had his worst hole ever in his career on the 6th hole at Hyde Park, and he had an 11. I'm also showing, I gotta be honest, I'm also showing a picture because I love the lady in the back is almost striking a similar pose to Ben Hogan. So Selva Marina was host in 65 and 66. This is a picture from that tournament. Jacksonville, Dan Sykes was born in Florida, moved to Jacksonville. He won the Jacksonville Open in 67. It was played at Deerwood at 7 different years. I told you I like photographs. I couldn't pass this one up. I had to show it to you because I think that old golf cart is just so special.
He's running away.
Now getting a little closer to the current era, Sawgrass Country Club hosted the Tournament Players Championship from 77 to 81. And here's the history of what was called the Tournament Players Championship. It was played at Colonial, Atlanta Country Club Colonial in Inverary, and I got my second start in the golf business as a ranger and a starter in 1978 at Inverary Country Club, 2 years after Jack won the tournament there. And then you can see Sawgrass Country Club, the winners, good names, Marquez, Nicholas, Watkins, Lee Trevino, and Ray Floyd. And now we're up to the Players Championship. The famous first tournament in 1982 when Jerry Pate was caught there, splashing in the pool. Dean Beeman and Pete Dye are already in the water waiting for him to join. So, I have a number of these old photographs. When I was at Inverary Country Club, I was the head professional when they were building TPC Sawgrass, and they sent out publicity packets about the update. And for whatever reason, I decided to save those publicity photographs, which I still have today. I want to share some of those with you. That was the original first tee in the stadium seating, and I took this picture about 3 years ago of what the first tee looks like now. And if you take a look on the left and then on the right, the same oak tree is still there over 40 years later. That was the first tee again with the stadium seating and the original clubhouse. This was how rough and rustic the TPC Sawgrass was when it opened. That's the 13th. And this is looking back on how they've changed it to a more what they call park-like golf course. Now how about famous island greens? Do you know that the first island green was in 1901 at Baltusrol Country Club? It no longer exists. I'm running a little slow, but I'll tell you a quick story. It's a par 4. It was drivable. Walter Hagen, drivable by great players. Walter Hagen teed off, knocked his ball into the moat. Now the moat was only 2 or 3 feet deep. Hagen got down there. He was playing with a golf ball. Some of the golf balls in that era actually floated. How many of you remember floater balls? I grew up in the era of floater balls. But his ball was floating. So they say he took off his shoes, took off his socks, rolled up his pants, got in the 2-3 feet of water, asked his caddy for a wedge. He hit the ball that was floating in the water up on the green, a couple feet away from the pin, and put it in the hole for a birdie. The fabulous Walter Hagen. Herb Strong, when he redesigned and created the ocean course, created a type of island green, but he was a little more ample with the space around it for the average player. And this is what the 17th hole looked like in those publicity photos back in 1981. Now I want to point something out to you. You see that tree back there? Beyond the green? That's the tree that's on the island today. But it wasn't an island when the course first opened. There, you see that large area? That high area to the right? Those were spectator mounts. So they, at the time, they thought it would be a good idea to put spectator mounts between the 16th green and the 17th hole. That's since been dug out and taken away, and now you can get that single tree out in the middle of the lake, and everybody can see from both sides. This is a picture I took about 5 years ago on the Sunday before the Players' Championship, just showing the seating and again the park-like look. This was the construction of the 18th hole. You can see the hall paths and them putting in and this is as they progressed. They had grass down on the ground, but they still hadn't cut the tops off the railroad ties. But you can see how tall the spectator mound was to the right of the 18th green, and you can see the pyramid clubhouse in the background. This was a picture in the early 80s, and you can see how that hill became what Lehman called stadium seating at the time, which they built up using railroad ties. You'd sit on the grass, but it was supported, your legs were on grass, railroad ties, grass, railroad ties all the way up. This was before corporate entertaining. That's the old clubhouse. How many of you remember that one? That's me in the tractor. They gave me a chance to take a couple whacks at the old clubhouse when we started tearing it down. It was literally the Monday after the tournament in 2006. The There's the clubhouse today,
Quite an improvement.
and this was less than 2 weeks ago. This is Scotty Scheffler on the 18th hole. You can see the crowds, you can see the corporate entertainment as he was driving his way to victory last Sunday. So, I don't know how many of you realize this, but when Dean Beeman decided to keep the Tournament Players Club here in Honolulu Beach, he moved PGA Tour headquarters from Washington, D.C. He moved all 12 employees as well. They got 2 small townhouses over to Oak Ridge, and I was told they were about 800, 900 feet each, little ones, and that's the first tour offices, 12 people, about 1,700 total square feet. If you go into the TPC clubhouse today, you walk in the front doors and you look up at that beautiful ornate ceiling. It's about a 12-foot ceiling. That's about 1,700 square feet, the entry level. So the tour headquarters was the same size as just the entry to the clubhouse at TPC Sawgrass today. This is the new global headquarters off of Route 210. Over 1,000 employees now. They're going to be adding a second building. It's under construction. If you drive by, you wonder what it is. They're going to call it PGA Tour Studios. Sports. You've heard about all the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars that they're spending in golf. The reason they can afford that is not because of the ticket prices that you pay to go watch a tournament. It's not even because of the sponsors. It's because of media today. Everything that's going on, more advertising. You can watch every single hole of golf today. It's all being built around media, and that's what's driving it today. Oops, one more. I don't know if you know, but the World Golf Hall of Fame is leaving. They had a 25-year lease. They decided to give the artifacts to the USGA, who's building a second headquarters in Pinehurst, North Carolina. And the Hall of Fame, I'm saddened by it, but the Hall of Fame is leaving St. Johns County at the end of the year, actually. So that's the story I got for you, folks. I hope you learned something. And it sounded like you got a couple of laughs along with me. So I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you might have.
I noticed on the picture when Jerry Payton was jumping on the water, behind the green on 18 at Sawgrass, it looked like there was a large trap. And I've seen some other pictures early on that almost look like a St. Andrews bunker behind 18. It's not that way now. Was it like that when they first opened up?
There is a bunker between the very back of the green and the water that partially wraps around the back. But I think they shortened it, made it smaller,
Yeah.
and created a roll-off area.
I'll have to bring you a picture. I'm a storyteller at TPC, that's why. And I should bring you a picture to see what you think of it.
I don't know if you know, but I wrote the story.
I know. You're the reason I came tonight, sir.
I was asked, I don't know if you know the story, I was asked to write a history of TPC Sawgrass and the players as an employee training manual. And when I turned it in, they said, this needs to be a book. So when the course reopened in 2007, I was part of a team that was asked to review artifacts and add the artifacts, and that's what drove the writing of the book. And then they asked me to create the Storyteller program, which has done wonderful things. I don't know if you're familiar with the Storyteller program, but thank you for your service. I think $160,000, is that the new number?
Yeah, something in that range. We gave away $36,000 last in December.
All volunteers, I think there's about 53 of you now.
About 50, yeah.
And they volunteer their time to give people tours. You wouldn't believe how many people come to see TPC Sawgrass. Are they still letting you take people out on the courses?
Oh, absolutely.
C-17.
With rare exceptions, but oh, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So people offer the storytellers tips. They all turn them in. And since 2007, $180-some thousand have been given to local charities through the storytellers.
So we have a committee of about, we give away about 4 or 5 little charities and don't get any money from anybody else, basically, small groups. So,
Great. Any other questions?
I think it's kind of interesting that Herbert Strong became one of the founders and first officers of the PGA, and now their headquarters are here.
Yes, well, and I don't know if everybody knows the path, but the PGA Tour and PGA of America were one and the same thing. But in 1967, they split. The PGA Tour is still associated with, but it's a completely different corporation than the PGA of America. PGA of America just opened new headquarters in North Dallas, Texas. Any other good questions?
You had a slide where you noted the tournament that was played at Atlanta Country Club in 1976.
Yes.
Do you know what happened on the first hole?
I think I'm gonna learn.
That's where I met my wife.
We both were there by ourselves and we both like golf, but I didn't know anybody else that liked golf either. So we just ended up on the same course at the same time. So we walked the whole course.
Yeah. What a nice story. Yes, sir?
Okay, I'm actually Scottish and a member of the RNA and a member of Presswood. And you referred to these organisations. I noticed online the PGA Tour says it's the official home of golf. And I don't think that's
If I mean the official home of golf on the internet or something. There's only one home of golf, and that's the RNA. So you say you're a member there?
Yes, I am.
And
Yes.
Prestwick as well?
So, yeah, we live in St Andrews for half the year and here for the other half. So we're very lucky.
Well,
And well true. And Presswood, yeah.
I was honored when I was writing my book. They let me into the Prestwick archives.
Oh, lovely.
And it's in the, whoever gets this book, you want to look up that page. Young Tom Morris, old Tom Morris's son, won the British Open, the Open Championship in 1867,
I can't remember the dates, to be honest.
3 years in a row. So they retired the red Moroccan belt.
Yes.
Because anybody who could win it 3 times, the belt was his. Well, they didn't play the next year because they didn't have a prize. So they went around to a lot of Prestwick asked a lot of member clubs to contribute, and that's where the beautiful claret jug came from, and it's been played for ever since.
The first 12 Opens were played at Presswood.
Yes, and his scorecard, my heart palpitates. They brought out a scrapbook and opened the scrapbook for me. I'm sure you've seen it. And it was his actual signed scorecard from the tournament where he had won the 3rd in a row. And they have most of his early scorecards. I mean, actual scorecard. I just couldn't believe. And tell you how life has changed and the world has changed? The scrapbook used to be out on a table, just like when you go to the museum. It was out on the table for anybody who came to the club. Could look through it, page through it. Up until about, I think 1970 or 1975. But wonderful to have you here. It's a remarkable club. The holes don't cross anymore. But were you there this fall when they played the original tournament course
I missed that
for a week?
Not at all.
Anybody else? Susan?
Well, it does pay to register in advance. That's how we picked our winner for tonight. Mary Crouch.
Yay!
Yes, there we go.
My lucky day, thank you, sir. I don't play well, but I can read.
That's all that's required, I think.
9 pounds.
Sir,
9 pounds.
We need a wheelbarrow to get the book out.
that's the reason I got friends.
Well, thank you all for being such a great audience. It's kind of you to come out.
Oh, it was